In Costa Verde, Central America, there was a Japanese woman named Yuki who was in a hotel. She was watching the news about Bruno Dias. He was the Minister of Trade. He said that he would lift the trade embargo policy on America. Yuki seemed to be planning something. She put down a strand of hair. Then Yuki fired a bullet from her sniper. It turned out that Yuki shot the trade minister. After that, Yuki hurried to leave the place, but she left a bullet casing near a piece of hair prepared earlier. The next day, at the CIA base, John Franklin received orders to arrest the perpetrator of the Bruno Dias shooting. Shortly thereafter, a woman came up to Franklin. She was Franklin's subordinate named Clover. Then she gave a file on the investigation. Investigators found a bullet casing and a hair in the place where the sniper allegedly shot Bruno Dias. Then they did a DNA test using the hair. The results showed that the hair was the hair of an American Marine named Brandon Beckett. This made them sure that only Brandon could shoot at a distance of 1.2 miles. After receiving this information, John ordered the SWAT team to arrest Brandon Beckett at his home. In fact, Brandon was slandered for Bruno's murder. He didn't even know that there was a shooting incident. He casually played PS at his house. Meanwhile, Yuki was in front of Brandon's house. She planned to kill Brandon, but Yuki wanted to make it a suicide. Soon the SWAT team came to Brandon's house. Seeing that, Yuki reported to her boss that the original plan failed. The SWAT team managed to get into Brandon's house. Brandon was shocked to see that. But Brandon could only surrender when the SWAT team took him. Yuki realized the initial plan had failed. Then she would do the next plan, which was to kill Brandon. Yuki was assisted by his friends from Russia to block the SWAT team's car, but the boss wanted it to look as if they were working with Brandon. Then Brandon brought to the CIA's safe house in Seattle. Franklin interrogated Brandon, but Franklin said that Brandon could not avoid it because all the evidence pointed to him, such as DNA and flight tickets. Then Franklin asked if Brandon's father participated in the shooting of Bruno Dias. Brandon replied that he just played games during his leave. But Franklin believed that Brandon was the culprit. Moments later, the colonel interrupted Franklin's conversation. He wanted to have a one-on-one talk with Brandon. The colonel believed that Brandon was not the culprit. He also wanted to find out the truth behind it all. After the colonel spoke with Brandon, Franklin ordered the SWAT team to take Brandon to a high-security prison. At a Russian workshop, a man got a call from the same person who had ordered Yuki and slandered Brandon. The man told the boss of the workshop to have his men block the SWAT team's car carrying Brandon. Meanwhile, the colonel went to the CIA. He asked Clover about the case against Brandon because Clover identified the evidence. The colonel asked how she knew if Brandon was the culprit. In addition, the colonel asked her to play the video of the shooting. Then the colonel saw one of the people in the video when Bruno was shot. Clover said that he was Donald South, the CEO of Novazil Pharmaceutical. Then the colonel mentioned one by one the people who attended Bruno's event. He thought there was something strange about Donald's presence among the politicians. Clover also thought the same thing as the colonel. Then Clover wanted to find other facts about the murder case. Meanwhile, Yuki and her friends prepared to block the SWAT team and Brandon. Yuki prepared to fire her sniper bullets at Brandon. On the way, Brandon felt that someone was following him. He tried to explain to the SWAT team, but Brandon's suspicions were rejected by them. Soon their car was blocked by Yuki's friend's car. Then they shot the SWAT officers. Meanwhile, Brandon tried to remove his handcuffs so he could help the officers. Yuki monitored Brandon from afar. She also shot the SWAT officer. When the men approached the car and were about to kill Brandon, Brandon managed to open the handcuffs. He immediately took the officer's gun and fired at Yuki's friends. Seeing that, Yuki tried to shoot Brandon, but Brandon quickly left the location using the SWAT team car. In California, the colonel went to the suspected Donald South. He approached him at the restaurant. The colonel asked about Donald's purpose for attending the event. He suspected him because the event was only for some politicians. Then Donald reasoned that drugs were one of the main exports of the American nation, and that included trade. Donald felt that his presence was very important at the event, but Donald asked if the colonel was accusing him. The colonel said that he just wanted to know the reason for his presence there. It turned out that Donald reasoned that the lifting of the embargo could improve his company, but the opposite was true. Then Donald mentioned the name of a Canadian pharmaceutical company that was going to merge with his company. He argued that the Canadian company should be suspected of the murder of Bruno Dias. Meanwhile, at the CIA safe house, Franklin received a report that the car carrying Brandon had been attacked by the enemy. In addition, several officers were shot by sniper. Hearing this, Franklin believed that Brandon's father Thomas had done it all. Then Clover reported that the car Brandon was carrying was dumped in the city of Aberdeen. Then Franklin told her to open CCTV footage and street connections in Aberdeen. Meanwhile, Brandon tried to steal one of the cars, but at the same time, someone saw Brandon stealing a car. Finally, the person reported Brandon to the local police. Soon after, the policeman came straight to Brandon, but Brandon easily paralyzed the two policemen. Then he approached the person who reported him to the police. Brandon told him to take him to where his father was. In Francisco, the colonel received information from Clover regarding the attack on the SWAT team that brought Brandon. But the colonel stood up for Brandon. He told Clover that the person who set him up probably wanted to kill Brandon. Hearing that, Clover agreed to help the colonel again. After that, the colonel asked Clover to find irregularities about the planned merger of two pharmaceutical companies, Novosil and Cycles, but Clover didn't find many irregularities. She only found out that there was an incident in 2 weeks. The person responsible was Josh Strayhorn. Hearing that, the colonel immediately headed to Canada to find Josh. When he arrived at the pharmaceutical company where Josh worked, a guard came up to the colonel. The colonel asked about Josh's whereabouts. Unfortunately, Josh did not come to work. Shortly thereafter, he received information that one of the Russians who blocked the SWAT team's car had survived. Hearing this information, the colonel headed to the hospital where the Russian was being treated. The colonel arrived at the hospital and approached the man. It turned out that the Russian was in critical condition, but the colonel was impatient to know the truth. Although the doctor forbade him to interrogate the man, the colonel was stubborn. Finally, the doctor allowed him to talk to the man. The colonel pushed him and threatened him. He asked about who told him to block the SWAT team car. The man replied that he didn't know the name of the boss, because he heard the sound of engines and helicopters when they were talking at that time. Hearing that, the colonel felt quite satisfied with the information from the man. On the other hand, Brandon got into a truck that was headed for Montana, where his father lived. When he arrived in Montana, Brandon met his father directly. Thomas asked why Brandon came to Thomas. Brandon said that he was in a difficult situation. He was slandered that he killed Bruno Dias. Later that evening, Brandon talked with his father. Thomas told him about his mission in Cambodia. He asked to kill an influential person in Cambodia, but his friend made a mistake and he was arrested. In fact, Thomas' friend had a gun pointed at his cheek. Then his friend said a code, namely Audi Vitace. Hearing that, Thomas thought that he should shoot the perpetrator. Unfortunately, the bullet also reached his friend and killed him. Since then, Thomas felt guilty and afraid of the code. Meanwhile, the colonel came to Brandon's house to look for evidence. Then he got a letter written by Thomas. Thomas invited Brandon to have a drink together. Seeing this, Franklin ordered his men to arrest Brandon at Thomas' house, but the colonel stayed at Brandon's house. He looked for other evidence. He found a photo of Brandon with his partner. One of them looks like Phoenix. Then he took a picture and sent it to Clover. He told Clover to find out who Phoenix looked like. Clover soon discovered that Brandon's partner was a sergeant named McConnell, and that McConnell had been a suspect in a crime in Afghanistan. However, the man was reportedly killed in an incident 5 years ago. In Vancouver, Canada, the colonel saw Josh in an underground parking lot. He immediately attacked Josh. The colonel forced Josh to tell him who Phoenix really was. It didn't take long. Josh said that Phoenix was the one who would embezzle $8 million. Phoenix did this when Donald South's stocks fell due to the lifting of the embargo spearheaded by Bruno Dias. The next morning, in Montana, the sunny scene was tense with the arrival of the officers who were going to arrest Brandon. But Thomas realized that something was wrong that morning. He then looked at the CCTV cameras installed around his house. Seeing that, he immediately told Brandon to leave through a secret passage that led directly to Thomas's back street. After feeling that Brandon was safe, Thomas came out of the house and raised his hands. He looked calm because he was innocent. Moments later, one by one, the SWAT team was shot dead. It turned out that the person who shot was not Brandon, but Yuki. Thomas rushed in and set up his sniper. He hid and monitored the situation. Brandon heard the shot. He thought his father was injured, but he kept communicating with his father. Then he climbed the tower so he could see his surroundings. He looked for the position of the person who had shot the sniper. Meanwhile, Yuki, who was still hiding in the grass, saw Brandon and Thomas. She was confused by the situation. Yuki thought that if she shot Thomas, then Brandon could know Yuki's position. Vice versa, if Yuki shot Brandon, then Thomas would shoot her. Yuki knew that the father and son were good snipers. After thinking for a long time, Yuki decided to leave. Before that, Yuki shot one of the pistols belonging to the dead CIA agent. As a result, the gun fired randomly. But Brandon saw something moving from the direction where Yuki was. Seeing that, Brandon immediately approached him. Brandon didn't realize that he was being watched by Yuki. Luckily, Thomas watched Brandon. Then Thomas knew that Yuki was there. Thomas shot Yuki's sniper until it was damaged. Seeing that, Brandon immediately approached Yuki. Brandon attacked Yuki, but Yuki fought back. Yuki even stabbed a knife into Brandon's chest. Brandon was surprised to see that the person who shot the CIA agent was a woman. Brandon was almost killed, but Thomas managed to stop Yuki. He pointed his sniper at Yuki's head. Finally, Thomas and Brandon managed to arrest Yuki. The colonel arrived at Phoenix's house. He searched for Phoenix, but he did not find Phoenix. Instead, the colonel found a fake passport with the name Brandon Thomas. He also found a water taxi ticket. The colonel thought all of that was new evidence. Then the colonel met a man who owned a boat. He went to an island that was thought to be Phoenix's hiding place. But the man said that there were 3 islands there. Soon a helicopter flew to an island. The colonel then remembered the words of the Russian in the hospital. He confidently asked the boat owner to take him to the island where the helicopter went. Brandon and Thomas contact Franklin. They told him that they arrested Yuki, a female sniper who shot another CIA agent. Hearing this, Franklin sent his men to Thomas and Brandon. Then the CIA acquitted Brandon of the murder charge because Bruno's killer had been caught. But they still got another job, which was to catch Phoenix, who was the mastermind of all this. Then the CIA agent planned to trap Phoenix by telling Yuki that she caught Brandon and would hand him over. The colonel managed to get to Phoenix's hideout. He quietly entered the house. However, Phoenix realized that someone had entered. He immediately attacked him. Phoenix almost killed him, but Donald came and told Phoenix not to kill him. It turned out that the real mastermind was Donald. He didn't want Bruno to lift the embargo. He feared that his stocks would go down and his income would decrease. Moments later, Brandon and Yuki arrived at Phoenix's hideout with the help of CIA agents, but Phoenix told them to come in. This made it difficult for Thomas to shoot Phoenix. Then suddenly Phoenix shot Yuki in the stomach. Brandon tried to beat Phoenix, but unfortunately, Phoenix shot Brandon in the arm. Thomas saw that he doubted shooting Phoenix. This was because Phoenix pointed a gun at Brandon. Thomas remembered his past in Cambodia. He was afraid of hurting Brandon, but Brandon trusted his father. Thomas said Audi Vitace, then he became very confident. He managed to shoot Phoenix. After that, the CIA agents managed to arrest Donald with the help of Colonel and Yuki. Brandon then approached his father. Thomas said that it was the most difficult job he had ever done.